We're going to begin with a series of rapid-fire presentations with leading Israeli researchers sharing their innovative work in alternative fuels and mobility. Moderating the session is the Director of Research and Outreach of the Mana Center for Food Safety and Security at Tel Aviv University, who is also a scientific advisor for the FuelChoices initiative. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Efrat Oron.
Hi everyone. I want to thank you all for coming. And I want to start with some numbers that you are all familiar with, but I want you to take a moment and think about them, because these numbers are astonishing. Transportation accounts for more than 60% of the global oil consumption, with with oil accounting for more than 95% of the energy usage for transportation. And this affects politics and causes wars. It affects the environment, with transportation being responsible for more than 13% of the global emissions of greenhouse gases, and of course, it affects our health. Now, if this disturbs you, and you're doing something about it, the good news is that you're not alone. You're part of a steadily growing community that is searching for solutions to slowly but surely wean us from this addiction to oil. So how do we do it? Well, we find alternatives. And you heard yesterday and this morning about the importance of innovation. And of course, you heard the talks of the Samson Prize winners, Professor Goodenough and Professor Kiesling, featuring their important and inspiring work on fuel alternatives. And I think their work really highlights the importance of academic research as a driver for innovation. That being said, we know that to bring these ideas to practice requires a joint an intersectorial effort between scientists in academia, entrepreneurs, industry, and regulators. And this was the idea behind Starter, to provide this platform for moving innovation forward. So, I'm excited to present to you today 5 of Israel's leading researchers that will give you a glimpse to the future of alternative fuels. And our first speaker is Dr. Iftach Yacobi, Senior Lecturer in the Department of Molecular Biology and Ecology of Plants at Tel Aviv University, and he will be talking today about hydrogen farms. Please welcome Iftach.
Can I have my presentation, please? Oh, I have to. Oh. Everything is done for you. That's good. Walking? Can you see something? Oh, good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation to come here. I hope you can hear me, all of you. And now you can hear me. Unfortunately, you can hear me. Anyway, my name is Iftach, and my lab is focusing in hydrogen production in a biological mean. What stands in front of you is a farmer's son. You cannot take that from me, and therefore my thinking is a farming thinking. So a lazy boy like myself, something like 20,000 years ago, maybe here around in the Mediterranean, probably here in Israel, told his dad, hey dad, I'm so tired, I don't want to chase this mammoth anymore, none of them left. Let's, instead of chasing and gathering all of this food, maybe we can grow it. It was a great revolution, and since then we have the agricultural revolution. Sadly, regarding energy, nothing changed. We are still behaving like our Flintstone forefather, and we are still chasing and hunting and gathering our energy. We are not growing it. And yes, we can grow it. So the vision of people like me and the people in my laboratory is to develop an alga farm, meaning farm in which we will produce not only food, but energy. We won't be dependent anymore on chasing, on the unending chase of energy. We simply will grow it But what we need for that is an algae, a species that we will have to domesticate from the nature in order to have something that will produce energy efficiently enough. Why do we focus on hydrogen? Hydrogen is a renewable energy source. This laser it doesn't work. Hydrogen is a renewable energy source, meaning that we using sun power and sun energy that you can find anywhere on the planet, you can produce hydrogen. Second thing, the combustion of hydrogen pollutes no carbon. Therefore, we call it blue energy. It's real blue. The only pollution that we have from hydrogen is water vapor. That is. But next thing, 1 kilogram of hydrogen contains much more energy than 1 kilogram of gasoline. Furthermore, it can be produced anywhere on the planet, as I say, and it has a growing market. Hydrogen cars are not science fiction anymore. Mass production of hydrogen cars started last year by Hyundai, the Hyundai Tucson, as you can see here, and with the Toyota Mirai. Mirai meaning future in Japanese. So there are customers that can buy this hydrogen. How we can produce hydrogen biologically? When you see this beautiful Japanese pond here, every pond that you see out there, it becomes green. Why it becomes green? Because these little bugs called microalgae can grow it. So they can grow anywhere on the planet, and those bugs can produce hydrogen naturally, but unfortunately not efficiently enough. How they do that? They take sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, and they produce sugar, that the source for all the food that we have on the earth. They produce oxygen, and they can produce hydrogen as well. Unfortunately, those algae are really not interested in producing hydrogen. They produce sugar, because sugar is the food, and that's what they need in order to grow. What we have done is, in order to hijack the energy transfer towards sugar production, we fuse with genetically modified algae without inserting external gene. We simply rewire the algae itself, so the electron transfer, the energy transfer go mostly toward hydrogen production. That's our innovation, and I would like to thank you for your time and to all the people in my lab. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Iftach, for this very interesting talk. And our next speaker is Dr. Brian Rosen, Senior Lecturer at the Department of Material Sciences and Engineering at Tel Aviv University. And he will talk to us today about intelligent design of energy conversion catalysts. Welcome, Dr. Rosen.
Thank you very much. It's on, right? Good. Okay, so the work that we do in our laboratory at Tel Aviv University has to do with catalysts. Now, what's interesting about catalysts is among all the technologies that have been presented at this meeting, I'm guessing about 90% of them are dependent on a catalyst at one point or another. And unfortunately, the catalyst can be one of the most expensive parts of any alternative energy mechanism. So what we do is we look to modify the catalyst, not necessarily by composition, but rather by structure. Because all of these chemical reactions are sensitive not only to the atoms that you choose to develop your catalyst, but rather the way they are arranged. And it's this latter point that I want to emphasize in two systems that I think will be relevant for this community. So what is the structural sensitivity of catalysts towards several different platforms? The two platforms I want to speak about are going to be gas to liquid conversion, which I think is the topic of the next session, and also in fuel cells, which I think a lot of us are familiar with already. So the point of gas to liquid conversion is to take methane from natural gas and to convert it into synthetic fuels as an alternative feedstock to crude oil. Well, the problem with the catalytic conversion from methane to fuels is that the catalyst deactivates. And this is not particularly desirable industrially, and it deactivates because of thermodynamics. Thermodynamics says that certain oxides should form and that carbon should deposit and that the particles should join together and you lose surface area. And all these processes lead toward catalytic death. But also all of these processes are sensitive to the arrangement of the atoms in the catalyst. So for example, carbon deposition is thermodynamically favorable when you're trying to convert methane into synthesis gas, which is a precursor for liquid fuels. So we want to tune the shape, the position, the orientation of the surface in order to resist this carbon deposition. Not thermodynamically, because we can't beat thermodynamics, but kinetically, that it will occur so slowly that the industry will want to use it. Also oxidation on the surface. Also particle sintering, losing active surface area. They all lead towards diminished activity. So we work with catalysts that are shape controlled. What does this mean? This means each material that we work with is crystallographically the same when you think of its unit cell, but it has a preferred growth direction or multiple preferred growth directions. And when you think about the processes you need to resist certain types of catalytic death, the mobility of oxygen within the crystal, the speed of a reaction on the surface, all these properties are anisotropic, which means they depend not only on the atom, but the arrangement of the atom within the crystal. And we can tune these properties in order to maximize catalytic conversion and to minimize all of these mechanisms that work towards death. We can also look at innovative synthesis in order to create very complicated networks of materials that have structures and pores and properties on the order of nanometers. And we can use these materials and tune their synthesis in order to give us the properties that we want. For example, this is in a combustion synthesis, something that is only at the academic level right now, where we basically use the burning of organometallics in order to create metallic structures with properties on the nanoscale, which can be very effective catalysts. So moving to the second part, we want to talk about how can we tune the structure of catalysts in fuel cells. Fuel cell has two types of reactions, an oxidation and a reduction. And for the most part, most fuel cells these days use platinum or an alloy of platinum in order to give the highest speed of reaction, which leads to high efficiency in fuel cells. Well, we're part of an initiative in order to remove platinum from the catalyst layer and replace it, even with palladium or a palladium alloy, as palladium's market value is about 1/3 of platinum. So for instance, let's say we were to take a palladium alloy like palladium nickel, and we were to change its synthesis such that for each surface, the palladium nickel composition is exactly the same, and the only thing that is different is the crystallographic orientation, or the distribution of crystallographic orientations, since these surfaces are polycrystalline. Well, we can do this synthesis. It's rather complicated, but this is an overview. And we can check it using X-ray diffraction or orientation imaging, and we can actually see the distribution of surfaces that we've made. In which way are the crystallographic planes of these catalyst surface facing? So we see with the three surfaces shown on the previous slide that they each have some sort of unique distribution of crystallographic planes, yet all of them have the exact same composition. So if we tune our synthetic methods enough, we can show that despite having the exact same composition, we can change the speed of the reaction on the catalyst just by tuning its structure. For those of you familiar with fuel cells, one of the fuel cells, one of the sides is the cathode, where oxygen needs to be reduced into water. This is how you complete the circuit, by consuming electrons. The rate of the consumption of the electrons in many systems is what limits the efficiency of your fuel cell. And what we show here is that we can deposit palladium nickel alloys under different conditions, And just by tuning the conditions, we can see vastly different kinetics. For those not familiar with this type of plot, I'll explain very briefly. The curves that are shifted to your right are the more efficient. And the curves that are shifted to the left are not as efficient. So we're not changing the material, we're only changing the direction that you would say it's facing. And finally, in our laboratory, we want to extend this idea not only to tune the direction that the atoms are facing, or the plane of atoms are facing, but also to deposit it in a certain XYZ coordinate. So we're really starting to build the groundwork to what some of you might want to call three-dimensional printing of catalysts. You can put the type of catalyst where you want it and when you want it, with the orientation that you want, optimized for your particular application. I hope I've piqued your interest, and I've hoped that these ideas may be relevant either towards your academic research or towards your company. I have my information listed here, and I'm more than happy to speak with any of you later in the conference about these topics. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Brian, and for keeping in time, almost. And we're staying in the field of fuel cells, and our next speaker is Dr. Alex Schechter. He's the head of the lab for fuel cells and electrochemistry, Department of Biological Chemistry at Ariel University, and he will be talking today about advanced materials for next-generation fuel cells-powered vehicles. Please welcome Dr. Schechter.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think we live in a very exciting times where the dream of having an all-powered electrical vehicle, and especially a fuel cell-powered vehicle, is coming true. Recently, we have heard of Toyota Mirai launching, and it's an extraordinary engineering achievement. However, despite this wonderful achievement, the basic shortcomings of fuel cells are still there. In our group, we're trying to mitigate these shortcomings, and I'll briefly go over with you some of the highlights that we have, real selected ones, not very scientifically, I must say, and explain how we mitigate these problems. Where's the Okay, with the help of Brian, I can skip this slide of what is a fuel cell. However, fuel cells, the unit cell can be arranged in a stack configuration where we have hydrogen and oxygen or air coming on both sides. However, the basic shortcomings of fuel cells are the following. First of all is the price of platinum, and the price of the membrane, which actually the price of platinum in the stack, in the unit, the power unit, is around 35 to 40% of the total stack cost. And then on top of that, you have the durability problem, both of the platinum, sintering, coarsening, and carbon corrosion. Carbon is used as a support for platinum. And the very basic, very fundamental problem of fuel cell is how to store the hydrogen, how to store the fuel. Everyone knows that the hydrogen is a light element, storage density is very low. In our group at Ariel University, we address all these areas. We studied different catalyst support to replace carbon based on tin, titanium, and other metals. We address the platinum issue by offering different type of non-platinum catalysts, both for oxygen reduction and for fuel oxidation. We study advanced membranes, and we combine all these elements into prototypes demonstrating fuel cell performance or hydrogen generation, as I will show. The first example is taken from a biological source. Actually, it's a biological-inspired kind of catalyst taken from the heme. We have used a similar molecule to the heme in the hemoglobin, showing very high activity in acidic solution, unlike the original HAM, which is inactive in acid solution. And got very nice, interesting results with that. Another type of non-platinum catalyst is based on ruthenium. We have studied it for a few years. And then we have found out a new, very interesting feature on top of that high activity. You can see on the right side below, that there is a comparison of the prototype showing almost very near performance in the power of a fuel cell with platinum versus non-platinum catalyst. The very interesting feature of this material is that we have found out that it is very active even in the presence of high concentration of a fuel. The fuel that we have tested was methanol. You see that platinum shown as a blue line, the performance of platinum is decreasing very rapidly. However, these catalysts show very high selectivity towards oxygen. We've used this property to offer a new type of fuel cells, one that you can combine both fuels, the fuel and the oxygen and the air all together in different architectures, such as tubular architecture or other architecture that can benefit from other properties, such as, for example, venting the product through the cathode. Another area that we worked at is substrate that replaces carbon. We have found a very interesting way of making nanotrees. These are metal tin particle that can be grown very nicely, hierarchically, and the interesting thing about tin is that it can be used as a reducing agent for platinum ions, and that therefore we can direct platinum deposition only on the support itself, thereby leading to much higher utilization of the platinum in a form of atomic layer deposition. Here is an example of replacing the platinum with the tin with platinum on the surface. And indeed, we see much better performance in current density as compared to commercial product. Hydrogen remains a very challenging topic, both from infrastructure perspective, safety, storage density. And in fact, the DOE, this is a chart that was taken from the DOE website. The DOE put a target of 8% density of storage of hydrogen. That means that today with a 700 bar tank, we can reach around 4 to 5% density of weight density. That is, 95% goes to the tank itself. We have explored a new approach together with the mechanical engineering department to generate hydrogen on demand by a reaction. The reaction is controlled by a mechanochemical hydrogen generator. It's a reactor that produces the hydrogen and forms a reaction and produce the hydrogen when we need it, and can be refilled very easily and very straightforward. Another approach that we are considering now, and we have started this project, is to produce hydrogen from urea. We made a rough calculation showing that if you use the urea that is produced from every person on this planet, each person produces around 30 grams per day times 7 billion people, we can produce around 0.2 million tons per day, which is a few percent of the total oil consumption in the world, like about 5% of the oil consumption for transportation. It's a safe material, it has high solubility, and I guess that perhaps after this talk, those of you who really need to go to the restroom will reconsider if they want to make this kind of contribution. However, the idea here is to use urea as a source of hydrogen by oxidizing the urea on one side and getting the hydrogen on the other side. The challenge here is to have both selective membrane that will separate the gases and active catalyst. Here we show, I would like to show a membrane, a unique membrane that we have developed for ion conduction and a very active catalyst showing a 10 times fold increase over the state-of-the-art nickel catalyst in this device. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge that fuel cells are here. The question we have to ask ourselves whether we want to be leaders or just drag behind. I leave this question open. And I'd like to thank the people, the sponsor, the group member, and co-workers and collaborators. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. And you heard about fuel cells, and we're moving on to internal combustion engines. And our next speaker is Mr. Arnon Poran. He's from the Internal Combustion Engines Laboratory at the Technion, and he will be talking about advanced propulsion system with high energy efficiency and zero impact emission fed by an alternative fuel. Please welcome Arnon.
I'm also want to point out that I'm a PhD student at the Grand Technion Energy Program, as well as being at the Technion Internal Combustion Engines Laboratory. Everybody talked about the need to reduce oil consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. And what I want to point out in this is that the ways to do it are by improving the vehicle efficiency and using alternative fuels, and we at our lab doing both of these things. First, we work with a low carbon intensity fuel, methanol, and we've chosen it because it can be produced both from natural gas or coal, which has abundant sources, and is potentially renewable, can be produced from biomass. And what's even so important is that it's in liquid form, so it can be stored very easily on the vehicle and doesn't need any significant infrastructure changes to put it on board. So we have a methanol engine, but how can we increase its efficiency? About a third of the fuel's energy is usually wasted along with the exhaust gases because they come out of the engine very hot. And we want to use this energy to perform some more work. So what can we do? We want to do some chemical process with the methanol and water by using this exhaust energy. So we combine them all inside a reactor and produce some better fuel with higher energy yield called reformate, which is mostly hydrogen. So this reformate, because it's almost pure hydrogen, burns very good at the engine and also emits very low pollution. So this way we produce engine with higher efficiency because hydrogen combustion is very good and clean, and we emit very low emissions. And this process is called waste heat recovery by thermochemical recuperation. So we weren't the first to study this process. It was widely investigated at the 70s and 80s. But back then they had some problems because of the hydrogen. The hydrogen would be injected at the intake manifold, and it caused some problems of backfire, pre-ignition, and reduced maximal power because it took some place of the air inside the cylinder. And they had startup and transient behavior problems because all the heat transfer processes are fairly slow compared to engine point of view. And it had some problems with startup, and they stopped the activities. What we've offered in our lab is to direct inject the reforming product into the cylinder. And we've already built this kind of engine. This prevents all the problems marked in blue. There's no problem of pre-ignition because we decide when to inject the hydrogen, and there's no problem of place of the air inside the cylinder because we inject the hydrogen after the intake valve is closed. But what we have to see here is that the direct injection of the reforming products requires us to make the reforming at high pressure. And we've already built in our lab a high pressure reformer. And the problem of startup can nowadays be solved by combining our system with hybrid propulsion system that can provide energy for startup. This is our lab and our experimental setup. And here we can see how well the reforming products are doing much better than the gasoline in terms of efficiency. The reformat engine is much improved over the same engine run with gasoline. And here we can see that also the emissions of this engine are much, much lower than the gasoline emissions, especially NOx emissions, which are reduced by more than 98%. And this is true also for particle number concentration, that we have reduced the emission of the same engine by more than 99% by using this engine, by using a reformat. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Alon. And wow, you're ahead of time. Our last speaker in this session, last but not least, is Mr. Asa Ziv. He's the CEO of Energy Storage, and he will be talking to us today about accelerating zero-emission transportation market. Please welcome Mr. Asa Ziv.
Good afternoon. Who wants to join me to my trip for the future? Everybody, I guess. Okay, welcome. But first, we have to decide how we will repower this trip. Few options. Gasoline, maybe too much pollution for us. Maybe batteries, too heavy, and recycling of dangerous material is quite problematic, and there are other drawbacks. Maybe you say compressed hydrogen. Will you feel comfortable to drive when under your seat there is 700 atmosphere bomb of hydrogen? I am not sure. And are you willing to pay the cost of hydrogen stations? They are very, very expensive. Okay, I be here. They are very, very expensive. And there are today, in spite of these drawbacks, there are two kinds of zero-emission vehicles today. One is a battery-powered, like Tesla, and the other one, the hydrogen-powered, is the technology that was selected by maybe the most of major car manufacturing companies all over the world: Honda, Mercedes, Toyota, and many others. But with these two drawbacks of safety and cost, do you think that this can accelerate this market? I suspect. So, a few weeks ago, Sandia National Laboratories in the United States stated very clearly that for sure hydrogen is the right fuel for the future. But finding storage material that will replace the high pressure hydrogen is the main obstacle between us and the proliferation of hydrogen-powered vehicles. Did I say challenge? The future is already here. We don't need any trip to the future. This liquid that you see also in the slide is safe hydrogen carrier. It's non-flammable, non-toxic, no pressure, fully and easily rechargeable, and inexpensive fueling station, and it is cheaper even than gasoline. It is kind of aqueous solution, and just like water that contains a lot of hydrogen, this liquid contains also a lot of hydrogen. That means a lot of energy per unit volume. How does it work? We take this liquid, energy liquid, and we take this, what is this? Okay, we take this liquid, and with our unique catalyst, it releases its hydrogen for use in the car when needed. Something is ringing here. Maybe mine? Okay. Okay, sorry. Sorry about that. So when it releases the hydrogen, you remain with used energy liquid. But this can be recharged very easily. You take this with another special catalyst, with hydrogen, you prepare a fresh, new energy liquid. And this process in both directions is done with almost no energy needed to make this process. And it is done in near ambient conditions. That means temperature and pressure, near ambient condition. You come to the station and you fill your tank with this fuel, energy liquid, and you release the used fuel for being recharged. Because it's inert, you can use plastic tank, very inexpensive, and you have a small, the red one, small box, small unit that releases the hydrogen on demand. And no other changes in the vehicle should be done. Very simple, just replace the high pressure tanks. This is another illustration of the same idea, and the recharging here is in the station, and there are other options. But the most important result is the cost. The cost for full tank, let us say almost 500 kilometers, is not only much less than compressed hydrogen, but also less than standard gasoline. And this may be a real breakthrough. This great technology was developed by the world-known Professor Yoel Sasson and his team. He was a former chairman of the Institute of Chemistry at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem during 8 years of research. And he's now our CTO, and with our excellent team, we are paving the way to clean transportation. Thank you.
Thank you, Asa, and I want to thank again all our speakers in this session. And I hope we ignited your curiosity and we gave you a little glimpse of what's going on, novel research in Israeli academia. And we hope to see you in our next starter event. Thank you very much.